Okay, now we'll begin. We'll begin with an introduction to the Stand Independent website from McKay Platt, and then we have a presentation on Mittleider gardening by Debbie Taylor, Cherie and Stephen Bodden, and then we'll. Sorry, I got to get my glasses on. I apologize. Okay, then James Fargo will introduce vital. This is a mouthful for me, okay? Vital importance of perennial tree and shrub food crops for sustenance and resiliency in challenging times, selection, propagation, and uses. And then the Hymas family will present their Back to Eden plan. And then we'll have Aaron Bishop speak. His presentation is titled The Blood of the Prophets and Preparing for What Soon May Come. We ask after these presentations, before we go to lunch, all those who have children in the child care area, please quickly collect your children. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Okay, let's first of all get the volume right. How does that sound? Okay, good. The Stand Independent website and this conference and our effort is a way to teach and inspire people to become less dependent on our surrounding society. Now let's see if this advances. Yes. This has nothing to do with money. Our motives are not monetary. Nobody is getting paid a nickel. Nothing is being sold here. But we seek to help any men and women to become more independent of the things in our society that we have become dependent on. Many people have given a substantial amount of time and effort, all on their own, to put this conference together. We have become so very dependent in our society on systems that are just doomed to fail from time to time until the consumption decreed has made a full end of all nations. My sister just had her freezer go out and lost a whole freezer full of meat. That meat was dependent on a continuously functioning grid. By show of hands, how many of you have experienced a power outage? Yeah, that's pretty much everybody. Okay, now, second show of hands. How many of you currently have meat frozen in a freezer? That's pretty much the same group. Now, don't get me wrong. I think that our power grid and refrigeration and air conditioning and grocery stores and propane stoves and gasoline and automobiles and flush toilets, these are miracles that have made our average citizen more comfortable than royalty of prior times. Here's William III seated on his throne. Now the thing on the right, that's a chair, but the thing on the left, that's his throne. But we have become dependent on these systems. None of the systems that I mentioned and that are listed here were a thing when my grandfather was born. None of him and his peers were dependent on any of these systems, but we are utterly dependent on them. The phrase stand independent comes from a revelation that Joseph Smith recorded in March of 1832. The phrase stand independent in that revelation has nothing to do with some lone prepper holed up in his bunkhouse, thumbing his nose at the rest of society. But it anticipates a society of equals. That's in paragraph 2. Preparing themselves by obeying God's commandments to them as a people. In short, it anticipates Zion. That's in paragraph 3. So food storage is one way we can become less dependent on things like grocery stores that have to be there continuously flowing and continuously stocked. We've created a website to help. The web address is standindependent.com. Another show of hands. How many of you have been on that site? Okay. As you enter the website, there's a green menu link, and you see it there. Once you click that, you enter into a submenu that will show a series of choices, like one on foods, one on methods, one on supplies, etc. Under the methods section, you've got a whole another submenu, one on freeze drying, another on refrigeration, another on dehydrating, etc. So under the refrigeration section, there's two ways to refrigerate without electricity. For example, there's a section on Zier pots, and Zier pots are displayed here. That's a method used in Asia, the Middle East, and Africa to cool their food without refrigeration. There's also one on root cellars that'll explain how to build a root cellar with some helpful links, like the one shown here. Under the dehydrating tab, there's a link for plans to build this nice dehydrator. The website has pages on things you've probably never heard of, techniques like confit and roulettes and schmaltz and biltong. Biltong is a technique used by Peter Morkel and his family. I hope you'll see his display today and eat some of the biltong that he has out for your enjoyment. Have you ever heard of storing eggs by water glassing? You can store eggs for as much as a year or longer using this technique. And I hope you'll see my daughter's display on water glassing today. So under supplies, we've got a section on seeds and food preparation and work tools and containers and clothes and cleaning supplies. So there's a lot of information on the website. Do you know how long seeds will last and how to test their viability? Well, the website has an answer on that. Under the Foods tab, there's separate sections for all the major food categories. And how you store these foods can be very different, one category to another. For example, fats and oils are very hard to store due to rancidity. Under the Fats and Oils tab, there's helpful hints for how to store some healthy oils that can last as much as 2 to 5 years under proper conditions without going rancid. Although food production and storage is the main focus of this effort, law skills is a secondary focus of both this conference and the website. We have gathered hundreds of helpful videos and have a tab where you can submit any that you find useful. Another show of hands. How many have been to the web video section of the website? Okay, a few. How many have submitted videos? Okay, great. How many of you have seen an awesome video on food preparation or lost skills? Everybody, just about. Well, so we could use your help. Submit videos that are exceptionally useful, and those we are storing those on hard drives and should have access to them even if there's a power grid outage. On the website, there's a single video on butchering. We have one on butchering cows. But on our hard drives, we have stored many other videos, and they haven't yet been uploaded to the site. We have a video on how to butcher a deer and a pig, and how to fillet a fish, and how to butcher a rabbit. Well, this effort is for you, and I was asked to give a short talk, and this is what a short talk sounds like. I hope you'll learn today. That's why you're here. I hope you'll assess how you're doing, how prepared you are, how dependent you are on systems that are likely to fail, I hope you'll go home and leave this conference and practice some of the things you've learned. My wife bought 24 eggs the other day. We have 12 eggs in the refrigerator. We eat about an egg a week. So I'm going to practice water glassing so these eggs don't go to waste. And then I hope you'll contribute. Contribute in your local family, in your communities, in your fellowships, and even contribute to the website. Thank you.
Another technical difficulty. I don't know what to do with it. Does this work? I guess you can have this other one. It's not working. What do you want me to do? This one? Okay. They plugged it in. Or this one. Now can you hear? Well, I guess we'll use this one. What? Okay. Okay, come closer. So my name is Debbie Taylor. I live up in Mountain Green, and this is my great friend Rod Southwick that's agreed to come help me. My husband and I were both raised here up in in Morgan. Sometimes I like to call it Antarctica. I think it's fitting at times. And after we were married, we moved to Ogden, and we actually had a garden. Well, my husband had a garden. I was just a supervisor. When we moved back up to the valley of Morgan and Mountain Green, we knew about the climate and the short growing season. We usually have from about June 7th to September 7th. We froze really hard last night, so my garden is gone now. So about 3 months. And then the high cost of water. If you had a garden, we didn't have secondary water, it would cost $350 to $400 a month for the water. And then you had the deer, and I think they are my nemesis. So we didn't even try to grow a garden. And about 3 years ago, I decided I wanted to get better at growing my own food, to become more self-reliant, and maybe to be able to take care of my family and set an example for them. You know, when I was growing up, my parents didn't grow a garden. I didn't know how to do it. So my friend told me about this geothermal greenhouse that she had seen online in Nebraska. And they were able to grow all kinds of citrus trees as well as all other kinds of plants. Well, I looked up and found out that their climate, their elevation, you took the clicker, come back. Anyway, and I wanted to look into that to see if maybe that would work for me too. And I asked them, I said, do you have any of these greenhouses in our area that I could go look at? And they had quite a few. So one of the most impressive ones was in Delta. It was by far the most productive. In fact, when we were there, it was in the end of September. The top one is my greenhouse today. Let's see if my laser pointer won't work that far. The top greenhouse is mine. Go ahead and push the next. Where's the cookie? No, go back. This is his greenhouse, and look at all the vegetables and the fruits that he was growing. It was in the end of September when we went to visit this greenhouse, and he was just planting for the fall crops. I think he was planting carrots that day, but it was just full, just like this. So at the end of our conversation, he said, well, I use the Mittleider method. And I said, the what? I've been a master gardener for over 20 years. I've worked at the Botanical Center. I've taken landscaping classes from Utah State, and I have never heard of the Mittleider method. So, and when I've mentioned I use the Mittleider now, they get it mixed up with Michelob Light, and I guarantee you it's not Michelob Light, it's Mittleider method. So, the next one. My husband and I went to Nebraska, and we bought one of these greenhouses. And I wanted my greenhouse to be as productive, that I could grow as much as I possibly could, so I decided to look into the Mittleider method. This is the book that goes along with it, and in the back of it, and you can go online and get a copy of this for free at growfood.com. In the back of it, it has plans for a greenhouse that probably would have been better than what we built. It certainly would be a lot cheaper. Okay, the next one. So I decided to look into this Mittleider method, so I contacted the president, and this is him down here, right there, and his wife, Araxia. And at first, he was just a little bit leery because he had asked me my experience with gardening, and I said, I'm a master gardener. And he said, we don't really like to work with master gardeners. They have their mind set. And I said, if it makes common sense, I'm very open-minded to it. And he told me that the Mittleider came about, it was created by a Dr. Jacob Mittleider, who spent his entire life trying to come up with a more efficient way of gardening. And he said if I really wanted to learn more about it, they offered what they call a boot camp. Even though he lives in Idaho Falls and several of the teachers live in Salt Lake and Logan, they bought a school in Kidder, Missouri, and twice a year he offers this schooling. He said, but I need to warn you, it will be a fire hose of information. And that was true. So my husband being a good sport, I didn't really give him any forewarning of what we were going to do. But we went back to this boot camp, and we were there for a little over a week. And it truly was a fire hose of information. But I'd like to tell you a little bit about the people in that class. A lot of them were engineers, so I felt kind of intimidated. But there was one headed to Mexico to rebuild an orphanage and build them one of these gardens. Two were going to Montana on the Indian reservation to help them build these sustainable gardens. And one couple there had just returned from a 3-year mission in Zimbabwe, helping the people create a fabulous garden there. The next one. Some of the people in the class were then headed back to the Philippines to build a garden. There was an echoing. The children in this area of the Philippines weren't even going to school. They were starving to death, so there was no point in having go to school. So this organization, the Food for Everyone, went in and built them a garden and a kitchen, then had the parents come and learn how to cook the food. Pretty quick, they had so much extra food, they were selling it in the towns and villages, so now they had an income. And the gardens and the produce came at a really critical time with COVID. They were able to harvest over 2 tons of produce a day and then distribute them throughout the communities in the Philippines. They have gone into 77 countries and built these gardens, and we just kept seeing all these pictures of these fabulous gardens. And it was so different than any gardening I had ever learned about, but it made complete sense. And with their simple instructions, even beginners can raise highly productive gardens in virtually any soil and in any climate. But the closer you follow the instructions, the more success you will have. But we learned that there's some major differences in the traditional way of gardening versus this Mittleider. And I'd like to talk to you about some of those. If you're interested in more details about this, like I said, you can go to growfood.com and just download an e-copy of this book. And also I have a display out there, and one of the teachers will be here later on to answer any other questions that I can't. So even though I went to this boot camp hoping that I could run my greenhouse better, a lot of the things they taught me and taught us helped in my greenhouse. But then we saw all those gardens, and we decided we were going to put it to the test. So we got home at the end of April, and the first thing we needed to do was to build a fence. And the deer stood about 10 feet above us watching us build it. So it took us to the end of June to be able to get our garden in the ground. So it's even less of a growing season. But one of the very first things is garden layout and design. So if you notice, with the Mittleider method, instead of evenly spaced rows, you have a 5-foot perimeter all the way around the garden, and you do not have any mulch. And the same, you have 3.5 feet in between the rows. So why provide the insects with a bug hotel? Make them walk the Sahara Desert to get to your plants. And we tried both. We did the grow boxes, and then we did the soil beds to see which we preferred. The soil beds are 18 inches wide with kind of a little pyramid on each side. And then down the center, you have the watering, which we'll get to in a minute, but you plant at the bottom of each one of those ridges. So you've got 2 rows of everything going. So when I'm fertilizing and watering, I'm fertilizing and watering 2 rows at a time. Okay, the next one. The soil. So in traditional gardening, soil is the very most important factor. And while good soil is definitely desirable, you can still grow a really great garden in virtually any soil. They taught us that they use whatever's available around you. And they do so many areas in the world. Like in one area, they use rice hulls. So one of our teachers at the boot camp was from Logan, and we wanted to go up and visit his garden. And he said, well, I can't garden in my soil. And I said, really? So we went up there, and I understood. I don't know if it was a riverbed, but it was just broken rocks with a little bit of white chalky. So he did the soil grow boxes and then made his own soil. So while we were back there in Missouri, they had us make our own soil. And it just seemed so foreign to me. It was 4 parts of sawdust, and it can't be super fine, and it's not real thick for obvious reasons. And it cannot be walnut. Walnut has a toxin in it that will kill your plants. 2 parts of concrete sand, not masonry sand, and 1 part perlite. It is the most perfect, the first bed that we had, and their soil, you can see, is the most perfect soil, and it's been fabulous to work in. The next area they talked about that was different was seed planting. We're used to just planting in the spring when the soil is warm. But germination is so imperfect, we lose quite a few, and then we have some really weak plants. So you can get a jump start by starting your seeds in a seed house, which the plans are in the back of that book, or a greenhouse, or in your own house with grow lights and a heating pad. Then you're only planting the strong, healthy plants. But then there's also some crops that don't like to be transplanted. I forgot, will you grab that shelf liner? So when planting seeds, you plant them 2.5 times the biggest width of the seed, and then cover them lightly with sand. Oh, I guess it's out at the display. I guess I left it out there. So then I went to Dollar Tree and bought this shelf liner. It's plastic with little holes. Lay that over your seeds. Then you can continue watering, and you're not disturbing your seeds. But the thing I noticed, it made them germinate really quickly. So I had to look every day, and as soon as I saw green, I took it off. And then I just put it in water with a little bit of Clorox and hung it up to dry, and so I'll reuse it. You can also use burlap. So when we got back from Missouri, I thought, I think it's way too late to start my own seeds this year, so I went to the nursery and bought seedlings. And you do introduce diseases and insects that way, but you know what? You just got to do what you got to do. So I took those into the greenhouse, and when I was able to finally plant the last day of June, I had tomatoes within 2 weeks. And I certainly underestimated how many crops of vegetables I could have grown this summer. And I should have done progressive planting, and they give you that chart in the back of the book as well. The next thing that is so different in this method is plant spacing. Rather than using the traditional spacing between the plants to accommodate the horizontal growth of plants like squash and cucumbers, you only use 9 inches for tomatoes. Slide 10. And then 12 inches for squash. You train them to grow vertically where they get the maximum light to conserve water, nutrients, and space. And in the back of this book, they give you this fabulous chart. So it tells you all the different types of plants and whether they prefer a seed or a seedling, the hardiness, when to plant outdoors, the spacing, whether you plant 1 inch apart, 2 inches apart, and then how many rows per bed, and etc. They give you a sample garden plan for spring garden, summer garden, fall gardening. It's been very helpful. So the next one is watering and weeding. I loved the watering method. It has worked so well. Our yard is about 3.5 acres, and we did drip system to it, and we've had critters eat them. We've had constant problems with them. And in the beginning, I was really skeptical because they said it would take 2 minutes or less to water this garden. So I ended up overwatering. And they are right. It only takes under 2 minutes. So it takes 3/4 inch PVC pipe, and then you, with a number 57 drill bit, which is less than 1/16 of an inch, you can't even buy them at Home Depot. I had to get them off Amazon. You would drill a hole every 4 inches at 12 o'clock, at 1:30, and at 3. And then take the plastic out. Make sure you get the little drill, or it will plug the holes back. But it truly only took under 2 minutes to water. It completely floods the root zone. Our well went out. We have a well, and our well went out in June, right during that heat wave. And so we had to leave our garden on culinary water. We were curious what it would do to our water bill, and it didn't change it at all. It just doesn't take that much water, and you're not watering the aisles. Oh, I forgot to mention at the end of each of the rows, my husband put a valve so we can adjust the water flow, because some of them didn't need as much water as other rows. And if you don't glue the joints, then you can just use threaded ones. You can just unscrew it and put it away for the winter, and then you can work the soil or whatever you need to. We also have ours on a timer, which definitely provides more of a consistent watering. But we do have the beds level. So we took a 8-foot 2x4 and put a level on it. So we level it completely, and that's how that completely floods the root zone in under 2 minutes. So by the weeds, by not watering between the rows, it minimized the weeding. I spent very little time weeding. It was amazing. However, until a few weeks ago, I just knew that weeds were put here to just torment me. Then I attended a class on foraging and weeds and learned how the medicinal purposes and how we could actually live and the nutrition on those. So now I am growing some of those in my garden. And I noticed when we went up to our teacher's house in Logan, he also had plantain and a few of those. So in fertilizing, when I was in the Master Gardener program, we were always taught we had to get a soil test. Well, there's a general rule. If you get less than 20 inches of rainfall, your soil will most likely be alkaline. If you get more than 20, it will be acidic. So that's how you need to adjust for it. In the traditional method, they use fertilizer that just has the 16-16-16, which is the nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. But it doesn't include the secondary nutrients and the micronutrients. And I know all the time growing up, I always heard used manure. Well, by the time you put that much manure on your garden, you've already added 10 pounds of salt. And the scary part is you don't know what else you just added to your garden. I had a cousin that got this great deal on compost. And so he covered his whole yard in this compost. Well, it had a disease, and it killed his entire yard. So when I was ready to plant, I used a pre-plant fertilizer that I made out of gypsum because our soil is alkaline, Epsom salt, and boron, which is 20-multene borax, at a rate of 1 ounce per linear foot, and mixed it in the soil. After transplanting, I applied 1/4 of a nitrogen, and preferably it's 3600, but it's hard to find, so I had a 48, and I just used a little less. That gives the plants a jump start, and it helps stop the transplant shock. After that, it's just the weekly feed. But by using this balanced and complete fertilizer of the natural nutrients in the recommended amounts, it took the guesswork out of feeding my plants, and it gave them exactly what they needed. And Stephen will tell you too, we just talked about it, they grew so quickly and matured more quickly, and they had a much higher yield. I know we were talking, and maybe he was telling you, my beets were like this big around, his turnips were softball sized. It's amazing the produce you get. Insects and pests. I like Captain Jack's dead bug. It is organic. I use neem oil or BT for the gypsy moth. I've been kind of playing with a new one this last week, especially in my greenhouse. And it's a 1/4 cup of, I don't know if you've ever heard Dr. Wood's Castile soap in peppermint and tea tree, with a tablespoon of hydrogen peroxide, a cup of rubbing alcohol to 2 quarts of water. And so far my plants have just blossomed under it, all my citrus trees. Harvesting, I think the last one. I feel I was successful in my goal of growing food for my family. I had enough to share with them, as well as friends and neighbors. I even had enough left over to freeze dry. I have learned so much, and I hopefully continue to do better next year. Now that my garden, well, after last night we froze really hard, so my garden is gone. I can extend it by, you can actually build the tree frames, which I think we saw pictures of them, and you can put, my husband put PVC over them and then put plastic, and it should have tomatoes clear into November, December. And you guys would have even longer with your warmer climate. But now that my garden's closing down, I'm going to plant in my greenhouse. I keep tomatoes, peppers, green onions, strawberries growing all year long there. But I'm going to do like that greenhouse in Delta and plant. I have a 60-foot bed that I'll be planting spinach and other crops like that. Besides those things, I grow lemons, limes, mandarins, grapefruits, pomegranates, figs, passion fruit, guavas, and I have miniature peach trees. So I did learn that even a beginner can truly grow a productive garden, if you want to come up, in just about any soil and climate. Now, they gave me great solutions for my first 2 obstacles. However, they did not have a great solution for the deer. And the watering method was so great. We're transferring in my greenhouse. I'm going to take out what we were using and put the PVC pipe in there. It worked so much better. And I really like the T-frames, and I liked having all those vegetables. When they get to the top of the frame, you just pinch off the growing tip, and it just flushes. And the entire center of the tomato plants are just covered in tomatoes. And not having them on the ground, I didn't have the bugs and the insects. And using that new soil that I made, there's no weeds. It doesn't have any weed seeds in it. It was great. So I'm so appreciative of those people in my life that have been willing to help me learn. And I hope I can learn so much more. And I'd love to visit with you out at my display, and if there's any questions. Stephen tried this when I came back from, and he would like to tell you their experience with it.
Yes.
Good boy.
Okay, we're good. All right, good morning. All right, my name is Stephen Bodden. My wife, Shri, she's over there getting replaced with a microphone. So I'm going to do a little jig for you guys. I'm going to do a little dance while she's getting ready. And that's getting up. So actually I'm not. So, okay. Earlier this year, I had a small injury that laid me up. Have a bulging disc at L5S1. And it gave me some time to catch up to my wife because she had this great idea to put in a garden this year. Actually, the last couple years, I've just been dragging my feet, just like I normally do. And so she, as I'm laid up, sitting in a chair, she comes in and she plops that book down in my lap. And after some excruciating pain and coming to a realization that I really need to read this book, we started reading it and had a great desire to try this experiment. So I'm not a gardener. This is the very first time I've actually done a garden. Shree's got a green thumb.
I don't know that I have a green thumb, sorry. I've done a little bit, but we're definitely novices. I've grown stuff, but not to this level.
Okay, so this is a picture of our garden, and I'm not going to go through what Debbie has talked about. I'm actually going to just go through, you can have a very productive garden in one season, from start to finish. Just kind of recap on everything that Debbie has talked about. She went through the details, and I highly recommend that you guys actually go in and do download that PDF if you really would like to.
Or get the book. It is amazing. It's worth it.
Okay, so this is a picture of our garden. We have an odd shape in our backyard. It's a pie shape. We live at the end of a cul-de-sac, and so we had to kind of make do with what we have. And this is what we started with. This is the plot of land that we decided. The first thing that we had to do, did you want to say anything else? Or?
Well, we had tried to keep everything clean. And so it was just getting the rest of the weeds out. While we did the rest of the yard, that just kind of sat. And we knew we wanted to put a garden in there. We'd done some grow bags the year before, and I didn't want to do anything until we knew exactly what we wanted to place in the garden. So it kind of sat there, and this is what it looked like in April 1st, when we decided to start building.
April Fool's joke. You're building a garden. All right. Ended up being reality, and so within the next few days we started mapping everything out. And in the book, Debbie talked about 18-inch grow beds. We decided to do grow boxes, and so you can see the lines that we have mapped out north to south because that would provide the greatest yield. So we have about 104 linear feet of grow boxes in there, and this would produce the most yield at the end of the year. And in between each grow box is 3.5 feet, or 3.5 feet. And since we don't have we weren't able to do 5 feet on each side, so we had to make do with what we had and just adjust fire. And so we staked everything out, and we started building boxes. And it's crucial that you actually have everything leveled, plumb on the ground. So that way when you eventually water, it distributes evenly throughout the box.
Yep.
And so up on each slide I have dates, so you can actually have like a time frame of how long it took to put this together. Okay, so April 16th, we have the grow boxes all built. We started doing the T-frames. As you can see, the PVC pipe, those are actually made to turn your beds into little greenhouses.
Yeah, that and to protect from the bugs, to help with some of the sun. So we actually covered those with the fabric. We were able to pinch it off at the ends and kind of keep those protected.
Okay, I don't know who that guy is building the T-frames, but we're going to... Okay, and so you can see that after we got the grow boxes built, we started doing the T-frames. And that's for your vertical growing. And inside the T-frames, we actually used wire so that way you can connect the baling twine to that. And there's also a wire that goes along the middle of the box at the very base that you tie it off to, and then you string it up and you tie it to the top. So that way it can actually support the produce. Yep. Okay, so I did a little scientific experiment, not that brilliant. However, I used a 5-gallon bucket, and instead of using sawdust, I used peat moss because we couldn't get a hold of sawdust. And it's the same ratio, but up there I wrote it down: 2 buckets of peat moss to 1 bucket of concrete sand to about a half bucket of perlite. You mix it up on a tarp or in your wheelbarrow, and that equals about 29 inches in an 18-inch bed. And then you just use a 2x4 to level it out, and you just move on. It's very time-consuming, but it's very productive. Okay, Debbie talked about the watering system. Okay, I'm talking. Okay. So what we did is that we're using secondary water, and I had the garden area piped for a spigot, and then I just tapped into the spigot, ran a poly line around the yard, or around the garden, and I just tapped into that. And you can see that I had put little ball valve joints on every single grow bed. But later, I went back in and added timers to every single grow box. And for about between 2 to 5 minutes is what we put everything on. And so when it waters, it goes down. I have it labeled box 1, box 2, box 3, box 4, so on. And it'll just go down the line and water every single grow box according to the specific time that we set.
And honestly, I think it was well worth buying the timers for it, because honestly it's so hard sometimes to think to go out and adjust or switch, because with so many boxes, all of it watering at the same time, sometimes the pressure wasn't the best. And so having the timer so each one can just have all the water, be done quick, and it just moves on was awesome. So I definitely recommend that.
Okay, so Dad had already had some plants ready, Terry Fawcett. That he had started at his house. And so in the back you can see 4 tomato plants, correction. And we thought they were cabbage, but they ended up being Brussels sprouts. So at the very front. And today they are mammoths. They are huge. Okay, so that's Sensi. That's our service dog. Okay, so on the very front row we ended up putting our potatoes where the dog is trying to smell. And on the right side we ended up putting onions, and behind it we have our grapevines that we had started last year. And you can see the green netting that we had put over the hoops to kind of prevent the bugs from going in and eating up our vegetables. Is there a laser? Oh, there, hey, who's this pretty lady? All right. Okay, so that is June 30th, just basically a month after we planted, and we're already getting a harvest out of tomatoes, and they're already Shree's about 5'2", and so yeah, they're about 5 feet. And so yeah, here's a squash on this side. One thing that looking at Debbie's that she did that I love is the vertical squash. So next year, like our watermelon, our cantaloupe, we're going to do vertical, just to save space because it gets.
Funny story with that. So we figured all of our vertical to get our beans, our peas, everything going up. And when I looked to plant like the watermelon and cantaloupe, it said I only need 21 inches for watermelon and 9 inches for cantaloupe. And I thought, wow, I don't know how that's going to work in a regular bed, but okay. So I put them in, not doing vertical, and then I'm like trailing all along the side of the boxes because I had nowhere else to go. So I don't know why it didn't occur to me, those go vertical too. So next year that will be different. And you'll see it on the back side probably in some of the pictures. Because I had nowhere else, and I had so many cantaloupe and watermelon growing. It was really fun.
Okay, so I'm going to just kind of speed through some of this stuff because we're running short on time. All right, so one thing that we've learned is that you have to keep up on the pruning and keep up on the weekly feeding. As you can see, here are the tomatoes, and if you're not pruning properly, it will go nuts.
Yeah, we were gone out of town for about 10 days to 2 weeks. When we got back, it was a monster. And so it took quite a while, a couple days to go through and try to prune stuff out, to pull the plants off. We have so many peppers. My plants were like so weighed down. I was trying to cut them off. And so you don't want to show a crazy garden, but we wanted you to see, hey, they grow so amazing that you do have to stay up on it, preserve the food, take care of it.
Okay, and here are some pictures of some of the produce that we have received from the bounty. Some of the tomatoes, some spinach, beets. Debbie talked about her beets. They're huge. Our turnips are enormous. I've never seen turnips that big before. Or even cucumbers. We had cucumbers that are probably 2.5 feet long that are ginormous. And so we started harvesting our onions last week and our potatoes this week, so they're out drying right now. And so that's it. We're just shortly over.
Sorry. Yeah, I was going to say there are a lot of things that we learned, especially not really having done a garden like this, and some of the things I've never grown before. So things that we've learned that we'll do different, definitely the pruning. Fertilizer is amazing. They need it. The plants need it, and they'll grow, and you'll have a ton. Definitely going to do the watermelon different. And, big thing I didn't do, which I will do different next time. Make sure in the book she references the chart of when you can plant. And definitely write down when you plant it so that you know when you're going to be harvesting, especially if you want to do another planting. That I didn't do because I was like, I'll remember when I planted it. But then there comes a time where you're like, okay, you have so many in that you're like, I think it's been in this long. I think they're ready. But I would say take the guesswork out of it. Just jot it down. Keep that with your gardening stuff. It makes it so much easier. But so happy with this and what we've been able to grow and have.
So we give it, 4 thumbs up. Okay, so.
50 years ago, you couldn't hardly walk through this place. It was wall-to-wall brush. There wasn't any grass. There wasn't any water. Nobody wanted it. On the truck. On the truck. the finest dog in the United States of America. Yeah, in Texas, too. Well, I was born in Ohio, born into poverty, to be honest about it. Lived out in the country amongst the Amish people. So I really got my life example set for me by my own mother. That's where my love of the natural world came from. I've never inherited a nickel, but I inherited a love of the natural world and a respect for it. When I got out of the university, I took a job. I sold vacuum cleaners door to door. I went into the fast food business. I teamed up with a young man, Bill Church, and it was Church's Fried Chicken. And we built that company up to over 1,600 stores, and we sold it. And with that capital, I was able to come here and begin my work on Sela, Bamberger Ranch Preserve. My objective was to take the worst piece of land I could possibly find in the hill country of Texas and begin a process of restoration that would change it back to be one of the best, and that has happened right here. By habitat restoration, by working with Mother Nature instead of against her, and that's what we're all about. 46 years ago, not a drop of water. 7 water wells were drilled, 500 foot deep. Not a one produced any water. The top 125 foot of these hills looks like this. It's Edwards limestone. When the driller drilled all those wells for me, he said, Bamberger, there's one place up here on the top, my bit dropped 40 foot. He said, you got a cavern under there. It's like an auditorium. The only thing about it was, 46 years ago, it had no water in it. It was dry. It was dry because the water that was coming in was running off as opposed to sinking in. When I came here, all of the little holes and all of that limestone were just as dry as the one I'm holding in my hand. Now what happened? We replaced that condition with this condition 2.5 years after we began. The first spring came to life. As we continued on, another spring showed up. We got up to where we had 11. Where did water come from? It came out of all of that holes and that perched aquifer like that. That's where it come from. It was stored in the earth, and all because of one thing, this one. And I'm telling you, I'm going to show you the greatest conservation tool ever made, and everything I talk about could not have happened without grass. The hill country is just covered with woody species. Primarily, it's cedar. We took out a great portion of it here on the ranch. We were just covered with it. We had no grass. When we took out the cedar and spread native grass seeds, and it began to grow, rainfall then percolated into the earth because of the root system of grass going down. Water percolates in, it fills up your aquifer until the aquifer is full, and when it's full, it has to come out somewhere, and they call that a spring. That spring supplied water for all the nature's critters, plus for all the families that live here, and even sends water downstream to the city of Boston. Now, what does it cost? Our governments and governments all around the world, they're spending millions and millions of dollars doing all kinds of things, dams and reservoirs and pipelines, and all of this can be done by you and I. We don't have to have government. We can't expect government to do it all anyway. But if we do have some conservation ethics, the results mind-boggling.
Now, do we see that kind of erosion here?
I'm telling you, truthfully, I've seen this property and the experiences that people have here change lives.
What does Sila mean?
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much. What does Sila mean? When I was younger, I discovered in the Psalms the word Sila. It means to stop, to pause, to look around you and reflect on everything you see. To me, it's like Thoreau was to Walden Pond. Gives us a chance to say, what's my duty as a steward of this ranch land? And I believe it's to take care of it and to share it. And if you don't share what you have, you're going to live a lonely life. That is a necessary ingredient for every human being, that we need to catch up and live amongst Mother Nature and learn to appreciate her for what she really is. I've given this land to a foundation. It'll go on in perpetuity. It'll never be any different than you see it today. When I leave this world, that's what I want as part of my legacy.